Okay, I can see a lot of you are joining. I suggest we get on with things. Today is going to be a great conversation. I don't want to hang around any longer. As you can see from your screen right now, restructure your brand strategy for AI. And this has been something of an intriguing topic, I would say. A famous American defense secretary once said there are known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and of course, unknown unknowns. And I think this one actually falls perhaps into the last camp, the unknown unknowns. I think a lot of people, because of course they're so used to interacting now with AI through an LLM interface, it of course feels like it is designed for human to machine interface. It feels smooth, it feels eloquent, and it gives us a sense that indeed we don't need to do anything at the back end to be interpreted and understood. However, we are, of course, moving into a new era where AI doesn't simply respond to us in just a chat interface. It is becoming agentic. It is becoming absolutely parts of the nuts and bolts of the very systems that we run on. And almost any company you speak to in our industry has a trajectory which idealizes and in some cases even imposes AI as being the very much future underlying platform of the entire organization. And I think that as we do that, we're going to start to see, unless we're better prepared, some of the wheels kind of falling off a little bit. I think that we might go through some of the same falling out with AI that we might have had in the early days when the LLMs simply weren't good enough and they couldn't follow basic instructions, but in a different way. And that's because AI simply doesn't read between the lines, or at least even when it looks like it's reading between the lines, it's actually not doing so. It's not getting the gist. It can draft, it can tag, it can recommend, it can personalize, it can reliably tell what is a hard boundary versus kind of flexible guidance. But all of those things are, of course, complete interpretations, and those interpretations can be wrong if we don't make sure that they are right. Coupled with the fact that we are trying to put rocket boosters on everything that we do right now, and AI, of course, is moving super fast, then the real risk is that we could end up having high speed in the wrong direction. And that is, of course, a danger. Now, there's a diagram which I have been really rather enjoying looking at of late, which you can see on your screen right now. And I use this, I look at this quite a lot because you can see on the left you've got has good judgment and does not have good judgment. And this is, you know, when you talk about your employees, if someone doesn't have good judgment, they're basically dead weight. And if they have good judgment, they can be a steady hands. That's in the traditional world without using AI. But now when you put that on steroids, the ones that don't have good judgment turn into slop cannons. And those of you in content production will know exactly what I mean by that. And the ones on the right will, of course, be turbo brains. And what's really, really important to understand about this is that what's getting you from the left-hand side of the diagram to the right-hand side of the diagram is not just the technology. It's not just another tool. It's that ability that we're talking about in this webinar to make your strategy legible by the AI as well as by the human. Otherwise, we're going to end up in that world on the left, which, of course, none of us want to be in, whether we are the client or the customer or the provider. So the good news is it's not just me that's going to be talking about this. I am here, but I have some smart brains joining me. Unfortunately, Megan has had pretty much everything wrong happen to her in the last 24 hours that could. She's been unable to join today's session. All sorts of things ranging from the geopolitical to the very local getting in her way today. So I'm sorry that we won't have Megan with us despite best efforts. But we do have Yazan, we do have Hugh, and we do have Tom. It's going to be a great conversation. Yazan has been something of a crowd favorite, particularly if you've been to Farmageddon recently. He heads the global omnichannel experience standards at MSD and has been not only knowledgeable, but also personable in all of the meetings that we've had him in so far. And I'm super delighted that he's come to join us today. He really does bring digital and marketing experience, but also that human experience to bear. And super glad to have him. We've got Hugh, and Hugh you will have met probably if you've been coming to our webinars for 2 or 3 years now, because he is someone we've called back for good reason. He's been absolutely fantastic. He is the Director of Global Content Strategy at Stellus. He's been dedicated to that role for a few years now, and indeed has over 20 years experience, most latterly focusing on content strategy and omnichannel, really creating that effective joined up thinking, joined up content that delivers genuine value, not just for HCPs, but also for patients. Also an expert in change management. So super glad to have Hugh. And Tom, I really would like the rest of the audience to know Tom better and to know his company. I think something of a pioneer in this area. What we're going to be focusing on this is really a specialist area for him and his organization, Forge DC. He has helped pharma organizations build the data foundations needed for that human AI era that we are in. Not just the AI era, but the human AI era. And that is why the work that he's doing is so valuable. I'm really looking forward to him sharing some more of his thoughts. So a couple of little notices before we go on. We do not need to ask us for the recording. We are recording. We'll send it to you afterwards. We massively encourage you guys to speak up in the chat. And if you haven't introduced yourself already, I can see a few people have, which is great. You've been hit my one of my webinars before, clearly. Please say hello. Say where you're calling in from. Say what it is that you would quite like to hear about on this topic. And in fact, in case any of you are tongue-tied right now and you're not sure what to write, I am going to launch the first of what will be a few poll questions over the course of today's session. So it'll appear on your screen in a second. It always takes a few seconds for some reason for it to appear, but in a moment you'll see it. There we go. Why did you sign up to do today's webinar effectively? What triggered interest in this topic right now? And I've given you a few options. One of which is quite simply, I'm exploring. I'm not sure yet. Maybe you were in that place that I spoke about at the beginning. You don't know what you don't know, and you're just here to learn and discover what might indeed you don't know yet. Second question, which best describes your organization's attitude to AI risk today? So a range of options for you there. And while you answer that question, you might remember that you actually answered a question on the registration form when you signed up for today's webinar. And I can show you the results of those questions now. And this is particularly good because today's results are pretty interesting. As you can see, before I've even labeled this pie chart, there is a real spread of answers, much more than usual. Normally there's a real polarization towards one or two of the answers. Not so today. So let's have a look at what the actual answers are. By the way, I'm going to hold that live poll open for a couple of minutes, so I'll close it just after I've shown you these poll results. Okay, in first place was this. Where does your company's brand strategy truthfully live? In decks, in documents, maybe some structured elements, but it's offline. No surprises there. That was perhaps the winner. In second place, AI use is mostly pilots, early structure, templates help, but designers document-led. Again, perhaps no surprise. Mostly decks and docs owned by individual teams. Okay. A few connected systems plus supporting documents. Structured and repeatable, 9.6%. Pockets of AI use. Document-driven, same amount, same percentage, should I say. Protocols plans are created as standalone files. And really, only 6% of people, as you can see on the right, saying a single source of truth used across teams and markets. 4.8% of people saying we have AI-supported study design and documentation at scale with all of those things in place. Those 2%, of course, scattered. So I think it shows that we have some work to do here. You're all in the right place. That's good to know. Second question, how well are your brand plans currently structured for AI or automated execution? Again, you can see quite a range of different results here. So in first place was unstructured, mostly just documents, presentations, a quarter of you saying that. Partially relies heavily on computers, on human interpretation, nearly 20%. A joint one, capability and culture gap, fragmented ownership on 11%. Mostly structured, but with gaps in audience or evidence mapping, 10%. And then here are the smaller answers, budget and support limitations, nothing and never even considered before. Okay, So perhaps no surprises there, but clearly, again, we've got work to do. I can see that nearly everybody has done the poll that I have live. So I'm just going to end that now and share the results of that with you. So let's have a quick look there. I promise we'll get to our panel in just a second, just a second. Here's some more results, by the way. Smaller amounts while they show. Okay, so you can see on your screen now the poll results have arrived. We've got 53% of people saying I'm exploring, so perhaps fitting into that unknown unknowns. Here to learn, perhaps. But a third of you saying we're scaling AI and need clearer strategic guardrails. Omnichannel personalization accelerating and inconsistencies harder. 0% of people saying that you've got a problem already. So that's perhaps a sign of it being something in the future that we need to take care of today. What best describes your organization's attitude to risk? Well, 36% saying piloting with defined boundaries and review. Interestingly, 20% higher than I expected. Fifth of you saying we use AI only for low risk productivity. And yeah, smaller amounts for the others. 0% saying AI risk is barely considered or controlled. So perhaps that's a sign of some caution, healthy caution at the very least. Okay. So I'm going to invite our panelists to come and join me on stage now. If you can show us your beautiful faces, that would be wonderful. And at the same time, I'm going to ask for everyone who is watching right now to make sure that this isn't just a one-way discussion. I know that a lot of people are here to learn, and you probably want to sit and listen. But do make sure your questions are answered. This is an opportunity to really make sure that happens. Okay. I want to start off, guys, and thank you so much for joining me here on stage. Firstly, any responses to what you saw in those polls? Anything surprising for you? And secondly, just talking not in AI for one moment. Let's just pretend AI isn't here just for a moment, if we can do that. Probably an impossibility these days. But if we can just talk about what you would regard your main challenges with brand strategy adoption are generally, that would be a good place to start so that we can make sure we're not technology-led here. So any surprises from the polls and anything that you can say around the challenges of brand strategy adoption, irrespective of technology?
I think, Paul, looking at the poll results, let me address that question first. I think I was a little surprised to not see omnichannel and personalization scoring a little higher, perhaps in driving the demand for this, because it's certainly something we feel. But yeah, I mean, I get the idea that we need those guardrails, and I suppose perhaps that's part of that issue as well, like thinking about how we make sure that AI is implemented responsibly and scalably. Scalably, that's not a word, I don't think, but scaled appropriately across the organization. That's something that we're kind of working with as well. But it's a very broad question you asked about kind of the brand strategy one, Paul. Like, what is?
I didn't say I was going to make it easy, did I?
No.
You've been at my webinars before.
I know. So what is the? Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah,
please?
what would you regard as the greatest challenge with brand strategy and adoption or execution generally? And I'm not specifically looking for a technology answer. It might be a technology answer, but I'm not specifically looking for one.
God, the challenges that we're having adopting brand strategy. Well, the definition of what brand strategy should mean in relation to omnichannel, I suppose, is something that we're experiencing. Everyone's kind of evolving from them. This is such an old story, but it's still true in many ways. Everyone's very much focused on delivering the things they need to deliver to get their campaigns out of the door, and sometimes being able to think about things more experientially, like how do I develop experiences for customers and not just bombard them with content. It's an old story, but it's still a true thing that we are up against, that change management aspect of getting behavioral changes that are getting brand teams to think about creating more experiences and less tactics. I think that's the challenge that we have at the moment.
Would it be unfair to say that you have an immature brand strategy in that case? Would it be, is it that everyone is just focused so much on?
It's just there's so much going on. It's not that we have an immature. We have these concepts and ideas and frameworks of how to do things, but getting people to focus and prioritizing which brands and which markets we work with, which aspects of adoption they focus on, but it can't be everything all at once. We have to prioritize. And so doing that in an incremental way that allows us to build solid foundations whilst also thinking about the things that make this exciting, like next best experience. I mean, it's driving so much good, positive change in the organization, but keeping up with that demand is part of the challenge of implementing the technology that helps us achieve the things that we want to do with the kind of automation that makes it easier for the brands to execute on those strategies.
Mm. Excellent. Okay, Yazan, I would love to hear the MSD. Well, of course, disclaimer: no one's speaking from their company point of view, but your personal view, perhaps with reflection on what's going on at MSD.
I think, I mean, interesting question to start with, Paul. I thought we were going to talk about technology today, but if we're going to talk about brand plans, I think I agree with Hugh. I think the maturity of the framework itself is there. There is maturity around the company. There's maturity around the people who are the marketeers and the need for doing brand plans. I think where I would say the problems that we're facing today would be in the adoption. So, and that doesn't mean that people are not doing it, but the adoption, which is the understanding of the definition of these questions that have to be answered within a brand plan, is completely different between teams, and there is no, let's say, one source of truth of a definition of how to answer a certain sub part of the brand plan. So that's number one. And then number two, I would say, to keep it technology agnostic or without talking about technology, would be how do you take these brand plans from a global perspective into a localized perspective? So what's the relationship between the global brand plan that comes from the global headquarter franchise teams or brand teams into the local business units? What's the relationship between them? Is there a relationship? Is it built on top? What happens if there is another opportunity in a market that has not been defined by a global team, for example?
Yeah,
Okay.
and can I just comment on Ghassan's sort of comments? Because I agree, right? And I think there is an aspect of, we can create strategies that, manifest in sometimes in PowerPoint documents and guidance and frameworks, but they have to have operational pull through. They have to manifest in a way that makes sense and drives the automation of things that we want to do. I mentioned MBE before, and kind of go into that idea of, if there's a big correlation with AI that drives a lot of the decision making in engines like MBE, but they need a good structured data in order to deliver the right experiences. Because if we want the automation where engines are sending out content to customers in an orchestrated way, more dynamically, we need to ensure that our content is ready for that we have the right taxonomy and tagging in place to deliver those experiences in the way that we expect them to be delivered. So we're not introducing lots of new things for people to do, but rather optimizing what they have and make it work in the way that we want to deliver the right message to the right customer. And I think that still remains true to kind of how we see things as well.
Yeah. Maybe Paul, and I'm making your job as a host easier. So I'm gonna add also one more
You
thing.
can come back anytime, Yazan. Yeah.
I'm gonna add one more thing. I think another problem that we're facing is the centralization of brand plans. Or do we have one system of record where we're hosting all of these brand plans for knowledge sharing, for cross-pollination between the markets, and so on and so forth? I think that's something that all of us are facing. And when you look at the responses from the poll that you launched before the meeting, we actually can say that only 10% have a standardized way of doing it, and 90. I mean, it's nice to see the different buckets of people, but if you summarize it, it would be 90% are like non-structured, non-centralized, no AI, or even no system of record, and 10% is only starting to dabble with centralization, and digitalization and so on and so forth.
Okay. So thank you guys for talking about things in a wider lens. Of course, I do now want to hone in on the technological aspects, in particular, where you think it might break down between the human and AI at the moment. And I'd like to hear from Hugh and Yazan, and then hand over to Tom, who might, I think, be able to give us some answers to some of the challenges we're facing. But Yazan and Hugh, please tell us where, in your view, this is currently breaking, and you'll see a poll question appear with a similar question for the audience too.
I'm going to start with this one for me. Where is it currently breaking for us? And I think sometimes it's in the harmonization and alignment of our taxonomy across our ecosystems, because it really is, I think it's a really important foundational piece that drives the automation that we want through AI and the capabilities that we want to deliver. You know, if we don't have, whilst we do have an aligned view of how we define customer experience and how we define omnichannel, that implementation from a technology perspective sometimes isn't quite as aligned as we thought. Our ecosystems need to join the dots. So when we're thinking about which content we deliver, our engines can deliver the right content. When we're thinking about how we want to report on the effectiveness of that content to our customers, then we have aligned kind of BI or business intelligence systems that can, pass that information in the same way consistently. So getting alignment across our taxonomy, across our multiple ecosystem connections is a really important part of that for us. And it's sometimes where it falls down.
It's more than just data hygiene you're talking about, isn't it, Hugh?
It's more than data hygiene. It's more than just like managing lists. It's about thinking about, a lot of content is tagged in a way that's driven by compliance, but it's not driven by strategy. So where does the brand strategy fall down? Because our content is aligned to the needs of compliance and isn't aligned to the needs of the brand. And that's what needs to change. So if our content becomes organized in a way that aligns to brand strategy, then we can start thinking about not only how do we provide the right content to the right customer, but also how we can understand its impact on that engagement with that customer.
Well, I think that's a microcosm of the problem, isn't it? Because, does the AI listen to compliance, or does it listen to strategy as priority? Well, I think it won't know unless we give it some form of guidance. Yazan, anything from you on this point before we...
I think I would add, I mean, the first thing I would like just double click on is what Hugh just said is, I mean, what we were looking at in the past was like, when we talk about tagging, we talk about like content tagging or channel tagging or campaign tagging, but actually, and maybe we should use a different term for it. Maybe tagging is not sexy enough, but like the documentation of brand strategy is very important. And I think what we have been doing in the past is that brand strategy was living in these PowerPoint presentations and mural board and whatever. And then we start doing content, and then we're telling people, please tag. And that is very important. But we have not done an excellent job in like documenting or tagging our strategy. And in a world where everything becomes a prompt, I think that's exactly where we have to start doing. Like, we have to start documenting our strategy outputs, making sure that they are data points for the AI to be able to ingest them, and to create this content hierarchy, or not content hierarchy, but the hierarchy of the rules, the strategy rules, the compliance rules, the medical legal review rules, brand guidelines. Strategy is just like a subset of rules that content has to be compared to. And so what we can do in the future is that we can tell the AI, is this piece of content in line with the brand guidelines, with the medical legal compliance rules, and with the brand strategy? So it just becomes another subset of standards that the AI has to check towards.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys. You can see that the results of the poll are online. I'm not going to read them out. You can read them for yourself, because I do want to let Tom come into the conversation. He's been super patient, probably crying under his calm exterior while we all throw ourselves around in a vague attempt to answer these questions, when indeed he's got all the answers. Right, Tom?
Quite the opposite. I'm super impressed. I think you and Yazan definitely could have run this without me here. Excellent answers and certainly aligned to the direction that I'm going to talk about. Let me just share my screen and I can run us through what at least we think of Forge DC about this question on extracting the data DNA from our brand strategy. Can you guys see my slides?
Certainly can.
Excellent. So how do we extract the data DNA from our brand strategy? Ultimately, it's a philosophical question before it's a technical question. We're trying to become architects of meaning no longer from human to human, but architects of meaning from human to machine or human to AI, if you want to make that distinction. As humans, the way that we convey meaning is through language. We develop systems of words, grammar, and context, rules that let us communicate complex ideas to one another. And now, with the advent of AI, for the first time, we can use that same tool, that same concept of language, to convey meaning to machines. So the key around meaning is that meaning emerges from structure. And humor me for a second. If we take the word objective on its own, it's ambiguous. It's only when we start to add context around that, we start to add rules and relationships between that word, that we start to understand what kind of objective we mean. A goal that we're working toward or an impartial perspective. Of course, this is quite a bland example. But if we take it into the context of a brand plan, your brand plan might say to increase consideration among high-value cardiologists, which is not a great objective, but for this example, please bear with me. When someone in your team reads that sentence, they understand that this is a brand objective and this is at the top of our strategic hierarchy. Underneath that, you might have the strategies that deliver against that brand objective. You might have the tactics that operationalize those strategies. You might have the key results that measure those tactics. You might have the budget that's assigned to those different key results. And you might have a specific target audience in mind. For those audiences, you might have some specific messages. For those messages, you might have claims or evidence to back those up. All of that information is somewhere in your brand plan. And when humans read it, they can understand how all of these things ladder up to each other because they've gone through some strategy training and they understand the relationships between these different attributes. So the meaning is all there, but it's not quite architected for AI consumption. So before we jump into the solution of how we start to architect for AI consumption, we need to understand how AI actually consumes. So typically in an enterprise setup, you'll have an LLM, and LLMs have a bunch of training data that they've been trained on. So your ChatGPTs and your Claudes and whatever. But in an enterprise setting, they're typically using something on top of that called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. How this works is you go and ask your LLM tool a question. The RAG technology will go and retrieve similar chunks from a vector database. So it's searching a database of pre-processed documents for chunks to find ones that are most similar to your question, which are all represented by numbers and vectors. It then returns those retrieved chunks with the question back to your LLM for it to then respond ultimately to that question, grounded in your actual data rather than just the general training data. So good. It's better than generic answers. It can search our documents, but there's a problem with this technology. It uses something called vector similarity search. And that's the kind of retrieval bit where it looks and tries to find documents or chunks of documents that are relevant for your specific query. So every piece of text in all of your different documents become points in mathematical space. And what happens basically is when you put in that query, it will look for words and phrases that mean similar things, and those will have similar numbers to your query. And then it will choose what is the relevant result. So in this diagram here, you might have a query, and when the RAG system is going away and it's found a efficacy email that's relevant, it's found some trial data that's relevant, and it's found a HCP study summary that's relevant, and it will chunk those different documents and find the specific elements within them that it thinks are relevant to your query. And it will ignore a bunch of other stuff that sits in your vector database, so all of your document store in your enterprise company. Now, there's limitations with this, and 4 key limitations when we start to talk about strategy. In a world where we are most likely prompting LLMs numerous times a day to help us build documents, to help us summarize things, and even maybe to help us with our customer engagement and our activation, we really need to start to understand how the underlying technology works and how to overcome these limitations so that we can be confident that the responses that we're getting back are indeed accurate and grounded in strategy that AI actually understands. So RAG as a technology is great, and it's a massive improvement on using general training data, but it struggles to connect the dots. The way that the RAG system works, it has no reliable mechanism to traverse the relationships between different information and build a synthesized answer that connects dots between this document and this document, or this piece of data and this piece of data. Second, it has no sense of time. So standard RAG treats every piece of information as equally current. There's no awareness of when facts were true, when they changed, or when they expired. It also doesn't necessarily know that you're describing the same thing in different systems. So it has no way of knowing that HCPA in your CRM is the same as HCPA in your marketing emails, or that strategic imperative 1 is the same as strategic imperative A in the same document. And often what it will do, it will fill in the gaps with guesswork. So when it lacks the sufficient context to answer a question properly, it'll generate something that's plausible sounding anyway, which is known as hallucination. RAG was actually brought in to help to prevent hallucination, or to reduce hallucination. The idea of RAG was that you could connect your entire document store in your enterprise and enrich the knowledge base of an LLM, which is trained on general data. And in many ways, it does do this. But when we start to ask more complex questions, or questions that require bringing together different data pieces and different relationships, that's where it really struggles. So why should we care about these limitations? Well, standard RAG is giving your AI access to words, but not to meaning. It can find documents that look relevant, but it cannot understand the relationships between the things that those documents describe. So to give 4 examples, maybe a brand director is asking, how's our first line positioning imperative performing? So something from the brand plan, how is that performing? So the AI is finding chunks mentioning first line and assembles a plausible answer from fragments of documents. It doesn't know that an objective is followed by strategies, which is followed by content, which is executed in channels. And it doesn't understand how that fits in with your overall brand strategy. It has no sense of time. An easy example was that you launched a new indication this year, but the AI is looking at last year's brand objectives and presenting them as current. It has no concept that there's different plan cycles, and so it's serving outdated strategy alongside current priorities. It doesn't know you're describing the same thing, so maybe your brand is calling it first line positioning in one section as your objective, and preferred initial therapy in another section. It's the same imperative or the same objective, and the AI treats them as separate topics and returns different results depending on which phrase you're using. And finally, it fills in gaps with guesswork. So a brand director asks for the key result on access and pricing. The AI has gone and retrieved relevant chunks from documents, but doesn't know the actual key result that you're referencing. So it's inferring that actually it's around formula listing from the context, whereas the actual goal is around formula submission. Close enough, but not quite good enough, really. Now, all of this matters not just because we're typing into LLMs and asking for questions and expecting answers. It also matters because your agentic AI is actually making decisions for you now based on this same data store. Of course, agentic AI may have some other mechanisms to retrieve, but unless you do the work to set up the relationships and the definitions and the meaning behind your data, it still has no reliable way to understand the relationship and the ontology between different things. So how do we become architects of meaning? The 3 missing layers, as Yazan and Hugh have both pointed to, are around classification. So this is the bridge between your business language, and this is key because it's your business and how you describe things. And I'm sure in Astellas versus MSD, they have probably very different ways of describing things and defining things. And this is where you've got to put in quite a bit of work. You have to actually go and define all of the key attributes in your organization, and you have to distinguish between them very clearly. The second layer is around rules, and these are the explicit instructions that you tell the system in how to interpret what it finds, and I'll explain what that looks like in just a second. And the final piece is relationships. So you need to make connections between the entities explicit and traversable so that AI understands that a strategy is related to an objective, is related to a KPI, and so on and so forth. So double clicking into classification. Classification is really around building taxonomy and meaning and definitions. And so for a brand plan specifically, a taxonomy might look like this. You might have your brand objectives at the top, which are the overarching brand vision statement that defines what the brand must achieve. You might have your strategies below that, which are the core strategic approach that defines how the brand will achieve its objective. Tactics below there, which are the named pillars that translate the brand strategy into distinct areas of tactical activity. Key results under those, which are the measurable outcomes used to track progress against each strategy. And KPIs under those are the key performance indicators that operationalize each key result for content tagging. What this is key is it's telling the AI not just what terms to look for in your documents, but also what those terms mean and where it can find them. So all of these things form the basis for a classification. And today we're talking about brand plans, but ultimately this stretches across any of your marketing data, your content, your journeys, your customer data, and your channel engagement data should all have some sort of classification taxonomy established so that when AI goes and searches that data, it can understand how those different data points, what those different data points actually mean for your organization. We then enrich classification with rules. So rules are encoding the logic that lives inside your brand team's heads, which imperatives map to which claims, or which channels need different approval pathways, or which KPIs belong to which brand cycle. These help to enforce consistency against your positioning hierarchy, validate data quality, and provide a logic layer that your brand team can inspect and trust. So these are things that your brand team can actually look at and change. So you might have one set, which are global rules, which are the overall system rules for how AI should understand brand plans, your business rules, which are specific to your maybe your business unit or the way that you operate as a global team, your data rules, which are telling the AI how different data elements must go together or must not go together, and maybe some localization rules around how these different concepts work in local markets. And then you might have a second set, which are specific to each of your markets, which might include specificities around how that market operates from a compliance perspective, and specificities around how that brand operates within that market. So an example of rules could be, from a global perspective, every local brand imperative must map to an active global imperative. If a global imperative is retired or replaced at plan review, any local imperatives linked to it are flagged for realignment. That means that when the AI goes and searches that data and a global imperative is retired or replaced, any local imperatives linked to that, it will know cannot be trusted because they're no longer current, they're no longer in date. The second rule is a local rule, which might be defined as a KPI ownership by plan cycle. So every key result must reference the current local brand cycle. KPIs from a previous cycle, which have not been explicitly carried forward, are excluded from reporting and flagged as legacy. So it's really about that data hygiene point that Hugh was making earlier, but making that super explicit to AI. And without this, AI systems can report against outdated targets, and maybe your brand director is seeing numbers that look right, but is actually measuring something from last year. Now, the final layer, because I know I'm running out of time, is around relationships. And this is critical, and each of these things need to layer on top of each other. Relationships is all about establishing relationships between different data entities. So instead of isolated records, every connection between different data entities is explicit and traversable, i.e. followable. So every one of those links needs to be typed and defined so that the system can follow the chain from strategy to KPI because the connections are built into the structure itself. So if you ask which KPIs relate to our first line positioning objective, the AI system can understand that, well, monthly reach rate is related to this key result around 70% target awareness, which is related to this tactic around KOL engagement series, which is related to the strategy around CV evidence program, which is helping to achieve this brand objective around first line positioning. And without these explicitly stated, the AI is going to infer what your brand objective is and what your strategy is. It might think your strategy sits above your brand objective. It might not understand that your tactic is connected to your strategy. And it might think a KPI is related to a different key result. And that is actually my final slide. Combining these three things together, though, if I may make a final point, is critical for reducing hallucination of AI systems, but also to achieve a level of AI intelligence that's able to find the needle in the haystack and granularly understand how your organization actually operates. And so, not only from a human perspective, in working with AI as a partner, can you have more trust and actually get a lot more done in an accurate way, but also the AI agents that are off busy generating your content or recommending next best action, or whatever else they're doing, are grounded in very accurate and very well defined relationships of how your organization actually works, which is critical. That is all I had to share. A lot to get through in 15 minutes. Apologies.
Thank you, Tom. I think you did an excellent job. You managed to bridge both the high level and the practical specifics, and not many people can do that in 15 minutes. So I think you did a marvelous effort, and I've noticed that somehow there are more people watching this webinar after your talk than at the beginning. If that shows anything, I think you've engaged us, and I know that there are a lot of questions, and in fact I'm going to launch a quick poll question just to try and capture some more answers from the audience. Please do, everybody listening, please do head to the resources section. You can see that we've noted that in the chat window, the resources section at the bottom of your screen, because there is some more information in the form of a paper, a white paper, and the ability to assess yourself on this. I can imagine a lot of you are learning about this for the first time. In fact, 53% of you apparently are learning about this for the first time, and will want to share so much with your colleagues about what they may be unaware of. And I think Tom was making the point at the beginning of his presentation, not that it's not just about your AI getting it wrong, it's about the AI getting it wrong and you being none the wiser because it's given you a very plausible answer that you may only discover how wrong it is when you are frustrated a year or two down the line about your actual results that you're achieving. So first, let's get our panel. I know that Yazan's already said that he's got lots of questions resulting from this. Hugh, I imagine, is just the same. I do want you guys to ask at least your favorite or most pressing question here about not just what Tom said, but going from what Tom said into reality. So, you know, these final 15 minutes are about how do we make this happen? So any questions around that or comments around that?
What resonates with me, Tom, I think almost came up in the first slide when we talk about objective. You know, what we're beginning to understand is how important it is to understand the things like communication objectives. And you mentioned hierarchy as well. It's also a big part of like how we're thinking about our taxonomy. Like, what is the structure of what we want to communicate and how we want to say it, and making sure it's understood. Because we talk about, I mean, Yazan, you mentioned it earlier as well, the idea that people have got to do more stuff, they've got to tag things. I mean, there's a balance here between kind of automation and accountability that kind of needs to be struck, that I haven't quite figured out what that sweet spot looks like, but there's something there that needs to be there to kind of make that work. So we need this structure in order for our content to work in the way that we want it to do. And whilst communication objectives are clear, it's really important to have that because we need to group things by some kind of objective that needs to be achieved so we can see progression in relation to customer experience and adoption ladder phases and how customers are progressing up against that. Without that, we really don't have it. So hierarchy is really important. But one thing that we do struggle with a little bit, I'm going to get a little bit more tactical, Tom, is like around things like how do we define key messages? Very different interpretations of what that means. You know, does it mean things like typical like messaging pillars like safety or efficacy, or does it mean the strategic message that might align to the communication objective? And when you think about that implementation, as it comes from global brand strategy to local brand strategy, of course, and as an aspect of translation and interpretation of that, that has to be accounted for. But key message to me remains a key challenge in terms of its definition and execution around kind of the way that we think about that. I've been putting you on the spot a little bit, but you asked me to ask questions, and that's one question that I would have.
I think I'll answer it from a data strategy perspective rather than from a brand marketing perspective, because I'm not a brand marketeer and I'd be, I wouldn't be qualified to answer it from that perspective. So I think from a data perspective, what we found building these data foundations for clients is that the more granularity that you can go to, the better, and the more you can create relationships across, like you mentioned, the top level sort of themes of the key message and the key message themselves. So I would definitely encourage having both and almost categorizing your key messages as well, so that you have the categories, but maybe you also have the themes at the content level.
Yeah.
And that's where AI can start to traverse those relationships and understand that, well, this asset carries this key message. It's about this theme, but this theme also exists somewhere else, but it's not related to this key message, for example. And that's where you start to get, I think, a lot more granularity in the way that, or specificity in the way that AI is understanding your brand strategy, and that will carry over into use cases like next best action or next best experience, where you're not, let's say, abstracting at too high of a level of saying, theme or key message theme, but you're allowing AI to understand and go a bit deeper into the specificities of different key messages that might exist within a theme or within a topic. I don't know if that's a helpful answer.
It's very helpful. It kind of
That's how
aligns
I
to my
think about
thinking
it.
as well. I'm thinking the same thing, Tom. So it's good to hear, get some comfort and alignment.
And Yazan, I do want to hear from you, but just so everybody knows, I've just finished that poll, so there's some interesting results, I think, there. Clearly, Hugh, your mention of organization and tagging and trying to make them sexy didn't work, because 0% of people chose the answer. But I will let you all pour over the remaining results on there. Yazan, your questions.
Yeah, Tom, thank you. Fascinating. I mean, my fascination on this topic, but maybe I have two questions. I'll ask my first one first, Tom. I mean, super interesting. Now, how can we do it? I don't want to build a data warehouse where I rely on data strategists and data analysts to go and update the brand plan. So how can I build this and give a front end to the marketeers so that they can update their brand strategy on daily basis, on quarterly basis, whatever? Is there a system that exists there that can help me with this?
So the way that we approach this, Yazan, and I don't want to speak for the entire industry, but the way that we feel that this is most how to make this operationalized is actually based on a lot of the same concepts that I went through. So by extending those rules to helping AI to identify those attributes in your actual documents, you can automate the tagging. I don't want to call it tagging because it's not very sexy, and it's actually doing a lot more than tagging. But you can run run AI agents to scrape your brand plans, extract the meaning and the definitions from those, extract the specific attributes from those brand plans and maintain those in what we refer to as a knowledge graph, which remains dynamic. So if they change the brand plan, they just re-upload it and it goes back through that automated pipeline to extract. It's an automated tagging concept, but it's applied to documents so that you're not overwhelming the AI and trying to manage and maintain too many different things. You're just extracting the core concepts and maintaining those in a knowledge graph of relationships, rules, and meaning.
Thank you. And then my second question, and I think it's a lot of our of the attendees of the webinar would think about that. But why would we do this? I mean, this would cost a lot of money, and marketing is human. So why do we want to upload this to AI? What would be use cases, benefit for the future?
So I think there's two key beneficiaries. The first is that I would hedge a bet that everyone on your team and probably everyone in your organization is using LLMs on a daily basis to ask questions and to help them develop documents, help them develop brand plans, help them develop journeys. we can isolate this data and connect it through MCP to your enterprise LLMs, so that when you ask a question to your internal ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using, it then now has the context to be able to crawl and access this data and return very accurate, non-hallucinated feedback. If you then connect that data to your content metadata, your customer data, and your activity data, and you apply the same sort of methodology to ensure that you have all of those relationships established and all of the meaning of your different engagements defined, you suddenly have a marketing co-pilot that doesn't hallucinate and that can help you with all of your everyday tasks, or at least hallucinates a lot less than a general LLM using RAG. I don't want to say doesn't hallucinate at all, because that would be bullshit. So that's the first use case. You have a smart agent that actually knows what's going on and actually understands the relationship between things. Now, if you think about an omni-channel strategist or a digital strategist using that tool who's serving 6 different brands, I promise you they'll probably learn something about the brand plan of those teams and be able to execute against it in a much more consistent way than if you're going to hand them a 300-page brand plan and ask them to read it and then build a journey off the back of it. So it's enabling, let's say, empowering the humans in your organization to no longer need to be an expert in brand strategy, no longer need to work with your analytics team to create analytics, no longer work with your technical team to create technical briefings, because the LLM can do all of that based off this data set. And the second beneficiary is the AI agents that are doing things for you anyway. What we often see is next best action or next best experience being recommended on the basis to maximize engagement. What does it mean, maximize engagement? That you're going to send them another webinar invite or something like that, but it's not based in strategy. So it's maximizing for engagement, which looks good and means, okay, you get higher engagement and you can prove now it's working. But actually, it's kind of a false promise in that context. So helping to put these guidelines in place, or guardrails in place, should also mean that your agents or your agentic layer can operate with that in mind.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the questions. I do want to go to 1 or 2 audience questions. I thought there was one from Sonia that was quite interesting, because perhaps it allows us to justify investment in this, just to emphasize Yazan's question about it costing a lot. And she asks basically about whether in creating better brand communication plans that are machine readable will also, as a side effect, also going to increase democratic access, potentially even adherence, because by having materials structured for machine, aren't we also paradoxically creating materials that are more accessible by a broader human population as well, minorities, patients that actually might benefit? Is that a stretch, Tom, or is that actually a useful side effect, and could this be a health equity solution indirectly?
I think it's certainly a good exercise to actually ask yourself what you mean by the things you say. I'm not sure, well, I haven't explored that specific use case, but I think the exercise of distilling your verbose PowerPoint decks into a more lean structure and pulling out the things that really matter, I think could indeed result in more clear communication to someone who's not a brand expert. So I agree. I think it's an interesting use case.
Yeah. I do want to, we've only got 4 minutes left, unfortunately, and you can see another final poll that's on the screen right now. I do want to just ask, with such little time left, for each of us to perhaps give ourselves a bit of a magic wand. And if we had the ability to make our organizations do anything on Monday morning in order to advance what we've been talking about today forwards, what would it be? So in the spirit of what will actually create the most action, what would you say is the most pressing or most prioritizable task that people should pursue immediately following this webinar?
Maybe I can go first. I don't know if this is allowed in your enterprise, but upload your brand plan or go and ask your internal ChatGPT some specific questions about it. and see what it comes back with. And I think that should be an alarm bell of how well your AI is following your strategy in some cases.
Okay, useful to know. Hugh, Yazan.
I would say, I mean, something that I'm trying to do now is tag context. I think we're talking about the same thing. So not only tag metadata that's related to content, but also what context are you deploying this content in? That's, I think, my headache at the moment.
So you just want your headache gone. That's your magic wand. Okay. Hugh, it turns out you've got the final word, Hugh.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what would I, magic wand on Monday morning, what would I do? Would I wave it and like introduce lots of new AI tech that kind of made everyone's jobs easier? Well, of course I would do that, but in a more focused way. I think I'd similar to you, Yasan, like make sure we've got the context correct, and that's that's kind of that's where we're suffering. Like we don't necessarily always know that. So, adherence to brand plans would be nice, would be a good start.
I think it tells a lot that given your, genie-like magic wand dream being offered to you, the thing that you actually ask for is not more shiny toys, but actually the ability to be able to make effective use of what we have already by
Yeah.
having the strong underlying structure. And I think that probably says a lot, doesn't it? We've still got a few seconds. Tom, any final words just based on what you heard Yazan and Hugh say?
It's not that complicated when you get down to it. It's probably already data foundations that you've built some of. It's just taking it to another level that you almost need to explain it to a 5-year-old, or at least enable a 5-year-old to follow what's going on, and that's what you should be aiming for to expose to your AI tools if you want them to hallucinate less and become more trustworthy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, guys, we have reached the end of our hour. I think that it's been a really strong learning exercise for so many of us, a really strong awareness exercise. Obviously, I studied what I could and had a fair few conversations in preparation for today, but even then, I found I learnt a lot from what was explained, both in the contextual side from Hugh and Yazan, but also, of course, on the deeper side with Tom. Massively appreciate all of you guys giving up your time, energy, ideas, thoughts, and hard work, frankly, in getting us to where we are. So thank you so much for being here. And of course, thank you so much to the audience who, in many cases, perhaps that 53%, didn't even know what they were signing up for. Well, I think that they will have discovered that it was well worth their time and indeed have a lot to do in terms of sharing this internally. So please do not be shy in reaching out. If you would value the ability to learn more either via the white paper in the resources or via conversation, even hands-on workshop style activity to try and bring this so that you don't regret mistakes made later down the line, then please do not, as I say, be shy. And I obviously wish you massive good luck on your journey with this. Our industry certainly needs it. We need to be authentic on this. And I think that this is one aspect of authenticity we absolutely need to be grasping if indeed we can continue to say we are an authentic, scientific, and honest industry. So let's make it happen, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.